Hi, I am James Milan, and I am here today for a candidate profile in the form of a conversation with Mary Ann Stewart, one of the candidates for the 4th Middlesex District State Senate seat, formerly held by Ken Donnelly. Mary Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming this morning.
Sure, my pleasure.
I wanted to give you an opportunity, rather than me describing what's important or relevant about your own background, let's have you do it. So introduce yourselves.
Sure.
Introduce yourself, excuse me.
Yeah, sure. I'm Mary Ann Stewart. I live in Lexington with my husband Duncan and our daughter Emma. We have 2 other guys, older and out of the house now, trying to make their way in the world. They're college graduates. One lives in Somerville and the other lives in Denver. So we miss him. And before we moved into town, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I spent my first 10 years there in a small rural coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And then we moved when I was in middle school to Columbus, Ohio, which was more of an urban setting. And then right before I started high school, we moved to Massachusetts, and I went to Medway High School and graduated from there. And then I attended UMass Lowell and finished my program there in music education. And that was right about the time that the arts programs were being slashed across the state. That was in the 80s. And I chose to go into performance at that point and sang with many of the elite groups around, and in small churches and in studios, and I was a recitalist as well. And I did that for some years. And then I met Duncan, and we started our family. We got married, and we started our family. We moved here in 1994, moved to Lexington in 1994, and Duncan had grown up there. We came in through the affordable housing program, LexHab, and we had a 5-year lease and hoped to find a house that we could afford, which we did, a little modest home in Lexington. And
didn't know there were any of those.
Yeah, I think we got the last little one. Mm-hmm. But we finished up there. We're still there. We're still in that same house, and it's right over the line and right over from Arlington Heights, and right on the other side of the Arlington Res.
And I know that you've cited on your website and the various interviews I've seen already, your experience that's pertinent, of course, to your running for this seat. And
sure.
If you want to just briefly outline the things that you think are most important for voters to know, then we'll delve right into a couple of topics.
Sure. Well, part of the reason we did move here was for the rich history and the conservation of the area. And as I've traveled around the district, that is definitely a key piece that people really prize, is the conservation and the history. We're very proud of all of that. One of the things that I think is very important is connecting with everyone and engaging them on purpose with the process of legislation. So that's one key point, I think, for me. And the way, since arts has been a big part of my life, and it was a lifeline for me as we moved around so much as a kid, I think that we're seeing just how much we are testing, and there's so much success and failure, winners and losers, rewards and punishments, and testing is the central piece of everything that happens in a school. And we need more innovation. We need more creativity to solve our entrenched problems, and we have a lot of them. They've been in front of us for a long time: housing, transportation, education. And because of my particular perspective on that, having come through affordable housing, having gone without health care for a while with 3 small children, having experienced the heartbreaking loss of a loved one to opiate addiction, I think having these experiences brings a particular perspective and more urgency into the Statehouse to try and help these, move some of the legislation and bring forward some of these issues with that perspective, as well as bringing them back out into the community and getting input from everyone. I mean, just on the opiate piece alone, Attorney General Mara Healey just said we have to get way more creative with this, as well as expand the education component. And she's, been talking with district schools to bring that into the middle schools and make that more of an initiative for prevention, education and prevention, which is necessary. So I think those issues and my perspective will make a difference, and it's desperately needed, I think, in the Statehouse.
Yeah, you've described yourself in various places as a shoe-leather activist.
That's right.
So I'm wondering, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And how do you see that translating into effective legislating?
Sure. So shoe-leather activist is a really helpful way to think about someone who is pounding the pavement and knocking the doors on issues, having the conversations one-to-one, and then also in small groups. But through my work with Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts, I was one of the people who went out to gather signatures for the increasing the minimum wage and getting guaranteed earned sick time on the ballot. That was back in 2013, I think, when I started getting that going. And I think that election was in November 2014. That's when it came to voters. In any case, I gathered over 500 signatures myself and probably knocked on just about as many doors, if not more. So shoe-leather activist is, I'm connected to the issues that I care about. Workers' rights is one of them. And so talking with people about that and having that conversation and really hearing what people are concerned about and sharing what's important about this particular issue to bring it forward, that's the biggest part of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can see that, and that's clearly important work, and it also puts you right on the front lines of interacting with people and explaining why this is important or listening to them, et cetera. I get all that. Again, it seems to me that a state legislator, though, is doing things that are fundamentally outside of that particular kind of dynamic or interaction. So again, how do you see yourself channeling that energy and that experience into actually operating within the Statehouse?
Yeah, great. So I think that's one of the things that's most necessary. I think we need more activism in the Statehouse. There's a lot of in the box, we're doing it this way, this is the way we've been doing it for 200 years. The Senate actually is a little more forward-thinking under the leadership of Senate President Stan Rosenberg. But the House is still very much in a 19th century kind of mode, and it's very slow and laborious. And I think to have the urgency of activists in there will really help to move things along. In addition to, it can't just happen within the Statehouse. You'd need a group of folks all the way across the state who are going to be calling into their representatives to express this urgency and why it's important to bring these issues or bills or whatever it happens to be forward. So I think coming in with that kind of urgency matters. And in the same way that, you can be creating that urgency outside in the form of rallies or, lobby days and things like that, on the inside, it's much more having those conversations with all the different ideologies in the Statehouse, with the people that you're working with and their staff, and working through those issues with urgency, credibility, and integrity so that we're doing things as quickly as we can in the best, most creative ways that we can.
Yeah, so you mentioned urgency and energy that you would be bringing in, that sense of activism operating from within. I want to ask you about a couple of issues that are particularly important to Arlingtonians, and then invite you, because the other piece that you mentioned was innovation, innovative thinking that's required, et cetera. So I would invite you on either of these, if you have ideas to share with us that would be innovative ideas or things that would be new and different, please do share those with us. So the first of the two things I want to ask you about is something very important to Arlingtonians, because I know you're aware of the school enrollment issues here, the explosion in school enrollment, and therefore the consequent need to invest more in our schools than we had even before. And I know you're aware, Arlington is a primarily property tax, homeowners property tax driven revenue stream. So people are concerned about that. All that then leads us to local aid. Chapter 70 local aid has been not increasing for Arlington over the last, say, 9 years while Senator Donnelly was in this seat. At a very high rate. It's about 13% from the numbers that we looked at. That compared to other communities around us, some outside the district we're talking about, like Cambridge has kind of exploded, but some also within. Lexington has increased by significantly more than that. What ideas do you have or will you bring to be able to ensure that Arlington does not continue to lag behind other communities in this area in terms of getting access to local aid?
Sure. Well, those are a lot of good questions. And I think your school committee and your selectmen are really on top of this issue, and they know they have a lot of creative ideas. So this is really great. I think good schools shine like a beacon to others all across the state, across the country, and it will bring in, a lot of folks into a community. People want that educational opportunity for their children and for their youth. So it's a great problem to have, except that state and local governments, with the federal government as a third partner, critical third partner, need to provide for that education appropriately, and we haven't been doing that in the Commonwealth, and the federal government is threatening to renege on their responsibility as well. So I think one of the first things, well, a couple of things. So we're still trying to catch up, and we struggle with the decisions that were made back between 1998 and 2002, when the income tax was cut by about $3 billion, and we have a structural deficit every year of $3 billion. So when the budget is beginning to be built, we start from minus $3 billion. And the fact that we are at about minus 500 million right now is, testament to that problem that is ongoing and needs to be rectified. You also have the impact of the Foundation Budget Review Commission that met over 2014 and 15 and came out with their final report in October of 2015. And they found that the foundation budget, the formula for deciding how much each community would get through the Chapter 70 aid, was at least $2 billion short. So if you start adding this up, it's no wonder that we have such problems. Lexington went without, there was a tweak made to Lexington's Chapter 70 about 10 years ago, which hadn't happened in the whole time that the foundation had been in place, foundation budget formula had been in place since 1993. Same thing for Arlington and other suburban communities. I know that they saw that there was some imbalance there in terms of that happening. So I'm not very clear about why Arlington didn't get a small adjustment like Lexington got a small adjustment. So I think they were trying to account for all of that, and I'm pretty sure that happened about 10 years ago, so I would look more at that. But I think these are, this is one major issue. The foundation budget formula needs to be adjusted, and we'll have to look, more particularly at that. And right now, the best proposal on the table is for the fair share constitutional amendment, which is a 4-year-long ballot initiative. And I was proud to be one of the first 10 signers of that initiative to get the process started back in August of 2015, presenting those 10 signatures with the proposed ballot question to Attorney General Mara Healey for her to approve. And that has moved forward.
Sorry, just to clarify, the Fair Share Amendment is one that may get onto the ballot in 2018. It's in the process of doing that, I think.
Right, it's in the process of, there's a second constitutional convention. So the first piece is getting the signatures and having it get on the ballot. Then there are back-to-back constitutional conventions with the legislature, both chambers meeting to decide back-to-back, and they voted to approve it last year. I'm sure they'll vote to approve it again this year.
Yeah, it was overwhelming majority, I think.
Right, and they only need 25%, I guess. And so next year, then it will come to voters in November of 2018. And once voters approve that,
and the provision itself is...
The provision is to increase the income tax on anybody making over $1 million. So on the $1,001 up to however many that is, there's a 4% tax for them. So folks with the greatest ability to pay, who currently pay much less than the rest of us on our income taxes will begin to come up. It still will be under what most of us pay, but it brings it up. It's a little more of a fair share of tax on their end.
Excuse me, but I think that the way that that's pertinent to what we're talking about here, the education,
Right.
is that it's going.
Yeah, I was going to say that will bring in about $2 billion in revenue, which will be evenly split between public education and public transportation. The public education component is for thinking about pre-K through higher ed. The component for public transportation is really all-encompassing as well, so it's the MBTA and roads and bridges and improving infrastructure as well as transportation.
Well, that's a great segue to the second thing I wanted to ask you about, and I want to give you plenty of time also to discuss some other things, so let me say it quickly, the MBTA. The MBTA, as we know, runs, according to MassDOT, at a $500 million, they need $500 additional million each year for their operating revenues. Any ideas about how to make that happen? Are you in favor of higher taxation in order to make that happen?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is. This is where the conversations really we need to be having. The fact that we know that this is something that has to happen, the transportation was established in the 1800s, and the systems are failing, and or are in the process of failing, and we desperately need a whole new system. We need something that is not just new or Band-Aids or anything. We also need to think it holistically about how we're going to connect parts of the state together. You can't get north and south. You can't get from Lowell to Waltham. You can't, there's just a lot of, it's not how we travel, it's not how we need to get around in the state the way the system is now. And of course we need to be using clean energy. With our commitment to renewable energy, I think the goal is 80% by 2050. I think it should be 100% by then. But to try and establish our value for clean, renewable energy, that needs to be a component of it. So we need to have a full conversation with all stakeholders, all the people, all the groups, all the organizations, all the agencies, and that's a process that I would like for us to really get started on.
Yeah, it sounds like a long-term process,
Sure,
though, and we have
absolutely.
these short-term issues to also deal with. And any ideas about how you might approach that?
This is one of the challenges with our entrenched, problems. These issues are always before the Senate and the legislature. They're not going to go away. And so I've heard both candidates say, we're going to hit the ground running. And I think that's just not how it works. I think we're stepping into a flowing river. We've got issues before us that were started well before any of us, and even Ken Donnelly came onto the scene. The issues of transportation and the public transportation system have been there for quite some time. And so we need to be promoting a process. We need to come up with a process, first of all, and then engaging everyone in that conversation about how we're going to improve. And then we have to dedicate dollars to that. And that's a conversation that a lot of people are reluctant to have, but I think that's absolutely necessary, and it's what's going to bring us to the results that we want to see.
So do I hear you saying then, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that you'd be committed as a state senator, you'd be committed to making that conversation happen?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. This is so, and we've said this different ways, all of us, the candidates, that these are not standalone issues. We have competing and compelling priorities before us all the time in Massachusetts. So it's not just transportation, it's jobs, it's housing, it's public education and training, and they're all related. Criminal justice reform and education and training, and all of it is a whole package. We need to really be looking at everything, and I think that's why it's so important to not to think of them in separate silos, but really instead of looking at everything sort of 1 and 2 sessions, to really take a long view and really look for a 10-year sort of benchmark or a plan that makes, that's going to take us out 10 and 20 years, knowing that the money for that, the dollars to be dedicated to that, we're going to have a plan for that. We're not going to be able to say it's going to be X by 10 years, but we need to have a plan for how we're going to get there. Yeah. Yeah.
And you were saying that it's kind of competing and compelling priorities is one of the just the truisms of dealing with things in a legislative body. I want to invite you to share with us a priority that we have not mentioned in this conversation, something that you're absolutely committed to pursuing that is perhaps the highest priority that you have personally that we haven't mentioned, or at least one of.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick just one because there are these compelling and competing. I guess one of the things I want to follow up on from what we've said so far is that the tax reform that needs to happen, with the fair share being the first actual real proposal that we have. One of the problems with our tax system is that it's inadequate and it puts the burden on those who are least able to pay. So we need to shift the burden of our tax system. That's one priority that I would love to be part of and bring that forward, and that is clearly a long-term strategy to do that. The other piece, I think, for public education, which is to really establish, so public education, pre-K through higher ed, is a key priority for me. I would be committed to that as well from the very beginning of coming into the Senate. And as a senator, with the deep understanding and knowledge that I have, being a Board of Ed member currently, and seeing how our K-12 system works, and having those joint committee meetings with early education and care and with the higher education committee, and we're working toward a dual enrollment program for kids in high school that can transfer easily to college and higher ed, also vocational education. And so just a whole picture that will, a system that is free for everyone from pre-K through higher ed, and not to neglect the 0 to 3 years also, because we know that that is a key component for any kind of readiness, and children need to be building their vocabulary from the very beginning. And so any kind of care that we're going to be offering needs to be thought through, the through line from beginning through higher education and beyond. So that's another key piece for me. And then, of course, within that is bringing forward more creativity and more joy in the classroom, and just a whole lot more. We're not going to see a lot of innovation with kids just having English language arts and math as part of the focus of their schooling. It's an important piece, but we've been forsaking all of the non-academic components while we focus on this narrow set of parameters for children in school. And we're all paying the price, because this is about innovation, it's about creativity, it's about thinking in different ways. I think part of, and I've said this a little bit already, but part of my experience with the challenges that we've faced and my background in the arts is that I do think differently about some of these entrenched problems. I don't have an inside the Statehouse kind of boxed thinking of how we're going to do everything. In fact, there's a lot of margin around my thinking for hearing from other people about how we need to potentially address our challenges and our issues as we try to move the whole Commonwealth forward, and certainly the 4th Middlesex.
Just time for a couple of last things. Time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what is, as far as you're concerned, and perhaps you just mentioned it, you can make that decision, what is a strength of yours that people might not be aware of, even with all of the public speaking you've recently been doing, et cetera? A strength that you have identified that you would bring that people might not be aware of?
Well, I think what I did just say is one of them. I bring many strengths, and one of them is the sort of three-dimensional way of thinking about problems that we have. I think another piece is I have a reputation for very thoughtful consideration, to really hear from all sides before coming to a decision. And another piece, I think, is having been chairwoman of the school committee when we were dealing and coping with the recession, at the time we had $100 million budget, and we had to be very careful about what we were going to be doing in light of the challenges, financial challenges coming at us through the recession. And we did that, and I focused on creating child-friendly, child-centered schools and community-conscious budgets. That strategy, the way of thinking through these challenges, we didn't lay anybody off, we didn't cut programs as a result. So as a result of natural attrition and some other things, we came through and recovered very well from that process. And I'll bring that component to the Senate. And I think I'm the only one who has worked on these issues statewide already. So I think that makes a big difference too. I have a network of people that I can, and this is critical because the issues that come before us in the Senate and in the legislature may be, it's not what one individual legislator can do. It's not what one legislator brings and says, this is the thing we're gonna do. You need that advocacy, of course, but then you need the outside, the Statehouse advocacy, so that the Speaker will pick something up and bring it to the House, and that the Senate knows that this is an important issue for people in the district or across the Commonwealth. So all the senators are getting input, all the legislators are getting input from people from across the state. That is so critical to our democracy. It's so critical to our engagement, our civic engagement, and for promoting and bringing forward the kind of 21st century Commonwealth we really need to be and we want to be. We can be decisive, about what that will be.
I asked you about a strength that you would have. What about, I don't want to call it a weakness because it's not, but something that you know is going to be particularly tough for you in this position, if there is anything.
Yeah, I've just been focused on bringing a positive mindset to the Senate and the process. And I think that is new. I don't think that's been a very tangible component for many, many years. And I think that is going to be a challenge to address entrenched protocols and way to do things and things like that within the Statehouse. But like I said before, I think under the leadership of Senator Stan Rosenberg, as Senate President, we are seeing just how great it can be when you can move forward and be much more nimble and much more responsive to the needs of the Commonwealth, and we can do that for the district as well.
On behalf of ACMi, I do want to thank you for taking the time out of your day and an overall very busy schedule to talk with us today.
You're welcome, James. Thank you.
Really appreciate it, and best of luck.
Thank you.
For Mary Ann Stewart, and reminding you to vote in the primary on Tuesday, June 27th, I'm James Milan, and we'll see you soon.